Attack on Planet Falrus by Joanna Monegatti. Chapter 1. My father once told me that the pond in Oldex Pond dried up hundreds of years ago. So I asked him why Oldex Pond was still called Oldex Pond. He said the name suited the city, so they'd left it at that. Next, I asked him who Oldex was. He didn't know, but said he would check it out. I am still waiting. I was waiting for Gomi at the foot of the local hills. Gomi was my twin brother. Although he was older than me by just 6 minutes, the way he behaved towards me would lead one to believe he was much older than that. We looked nothing like each other. My 7-year-old brother Pago looked more like me. He was the favorite in the family. But then he was cute, and everyone liked cute people. I was cute too once, a long time ago, but that's a different story. In any case, I didn't want to be cute anymore. I wanted to be cool and tough. Gomi, if you don't show yourself on the count of 10, you lose your share of the treasure. I was getting impatient. He had been gone for over 20 minutes now. So far, I had found a buckle, 2 coins, and part of a mirror. The local hills were known for their panoramic view of planet Falrus, and so people came from all over Falrus to see it. You could see Yoda's palace and mountains from here. Yoda's palace was where the king of Falrus lived. I always found it weird that the palace was so far away from the center of Iniswam. Perhaps the king preferred to live in the boring suburbs rather than the town center. Strange choice, I decided. I lived right in the middle of Driss, and I loved it. The local hills were a collection of 7 hills, all of different altitudes and gradients. I had been there only twice before. This time, my family had come to visit my grandparents, who had a caravan at the bottom of the hills. My brothers and I had come up to the hills to look for treasure. My father said there was a chest of treasure hidden somewhere on the hills, and my brother Gomi and I were determined to find it. My eldest brother Doulis was unconvinced that there really was treasure in the hills and was sitting with my parents and grandparents at the bottom. Pago was fast asleep. The hills were rocky and almost devoid of greenery. The cool evening air made me think of the approaching vacation. Where would we go this year? I thought of my previous experiences and smiled contentedly. This was the best time of year. The anticipation of great things to come was as rewarding as the experience itself. I took a few paces to my left and sat on a rock, looking down at the distant stream of the Yeni River. From where I was sitting, it looked so straight I thought God must have used a ruler when he made it. I had learnt at school that the Yeni River emptied into the Prolino Sea, the Arched Sea, as it was known. I had never been down to its beaches. I hadn't seen the Yeni River much either. Its course did not take it through my home region of Koponti. Sitting now on the local hills, I mused over my geography lessons at school. I didn't like geography. That was Gomi's forte. We were very different, he and I. We were different in many ways. Speaking of which, Gomi, where are you? I shouted once again, looking around me. He had gone right to the summit. A few minutes ago, I could hear his voice as he tried to draw my parents' attention, but they did not hear him. He was too high up. I could see them quite clearly from where I was, but they did not seem able to spot us. They were not worried about
We had been allocated 40 minutes to play, and then it was bedtime. We were off to Driss first thing tomorrow, and Grandpa and Grandma were off to the city of Barnistas, where they lived. Gomi! Silence. I began to worry. Why wouldn't he answer me? Could he not hear me? Surely he wasn't that far away. I began to climb, first slowly, then frantically. Luckily, the hill I was on was not steep at all. Dad would let us go up only on condition that we stayed on this particular hill. It took me 3 minutes to get to the top of the little hill. I looked around for Gomi. There he was, his back turned to me, knees on the ground. Gomi! I exclaimed, furious. What are you hiding? Shh, he whispered. I moved over to where he was kneeling. I could see nothing interesting except for a strange-looking object which looked like a metal matchstick. It shone brightly whenever Gomi tried to pick it up. What? Shh, my brother said again. He bent low on the ground and put his ear next to the object. I watched him curiously, wondering what he was up to. He signaled for me to do the same. I went down on my hands and knees and lowered my right ear to the ground. There was a buzzing noise which sounded like the crackle caused by tuning a nuclear radio. I looked at the object, then listened to the noise again. Gomi was looking excitedly at me. What is it? I asked him, confused. What's that noise? I'm not sure, Giran, he said. But whatever it is, it's certainly advanced, isn't it? Look at this metal. It's nothing like the metal work we have seen before. He pointed at the head of the stick-like object. It looked and shone like a metal, but it also looked softer and more delicate, and there was something funny about it. It seemed to be alive. It's surrounded by a strong magnetic field. It stings if you try to touch it. Try it. I timidly put my finger out and tried to touch it, but it felt hot. I withdrew my hand immediately. It's hot, I exclaimed, jumping up in fear. That's what a super strong magnetic flux does, Gomi said to me. It generates heat. He gave me a "you should know" shrug. How do you know this anyway? I asked, surprised that he knew so much all of a sudden. We were in the same grade after all. Okay, so he liked the sciences more than I did. But surely that alone could not put him so far ahead of me. Mr. Kellin said so. Remember last week's physics lesson in which your class joined up with mine? I could not remember. I was probably asleep at the time. What should we do with this thing? I asked, anxious to move on, at the very least, from the topic of school lessons. Then I had an idea. Hey, why don't we show it to Dad? After all, he was a scientist at the old Dexpond University. He would know about this thing with the super strong magnetic field. No, Giran, Gomi tutted. If we show it to Dad, he'll say it's dangerous and that will be the end of that. No, we'll show it to Square. He'll know what it is. Square? Are you sure? I wanted to get rid of this thing as soon as possible. Yeah, Square knows everything. You know that. I knew that all right. Square was my best friend and a child prodigy where physics and other sciences were concerned. But how can we get this thing out of here? We can't even touch it. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Gomi sounded crestfallen. He put his hands in his pockets and his forehead creased up as he stood deep in thought. I thought too, but sadly, nothing came to mind. I've got an idea, Gomi declared excitedly. What? I asked. We could carry it in a magnetic repellent. What's a magnetic repellent? I was getting confused by the minute and not liking it. Anything that breaks a magnetic field. It could be absolutely anything. Paper, leaves, even clothes. Clothes. That was our only option. We had no paper on us, and there were no leaves on the hill we were on. I took my shirt off. Let's use this, Gomi, I said, handing him my shirt. Are you sure? He asked. eyeing me with a bemused look. Why would Mom say... We had been allocated 40 minutes to play, and then it was bedtime. We were off to dress first thing tomorrow, and Grandpa and Grandma were off to the city of Barnistas, where they lived. Go me! Silence. I began to worry. Why wouldn't he answer me? Could he not hear me? Surely he wasn't that far away. I began to climb, first slowly, then frantically. Luckily, the hill I was on was not steep at all. Dad would let us go up only on condition that we stayed on this particular hill. It took me 3 minutes to get to the top of the little hill. I looked around for Gomi. There he was, his back turned to me, knees on the ground. Gomi! I exclaimed, furious. What are you hiding? Shh, he whispered. I moved over to where he was kneeling. I could see nothing interesting except for a strange-looking object which looked like a metal matchstick. It shone brightly whenever Gomi tried to pick it up. What? Shh! My brother said again. He bent low on the ground and put his ear next to the object. I watched him curiously, wondering what he was up to. He signaled for me to do the same. I went down on my hands and knees and lowered my right ear to the ground. There was a buzzing noise which sounded like the crackle caused by tuning a nuclear radio. I looked at the object, then listened to the noise again. Gomi was looking excitedly at me. What is it? I asked him, confused. What's that noise? I'm not sure, Giran, he said. But whatever it is, it's certainly advanced, isn't it? Look at this metal. It's nothing like the metal work we have seen before. He pointed at the head of the stick-like object. It looked and shone like a metal, but it also looked softer and more delicate, and there was something funny about it. It seemed to be alive. It's surrounded by a strong magnetic field. It stings if you try to touch it. Try it. I timidly put my finger out and tried to touch it, but it felt hot. I withdrew my hand immediately. It's hot, I exclaimed, jumping up in fear. That's what a super strong magnetic flux does, Gomi said to me. It generates heat. He gave me a "you should know" shrug. How do you know this anyway? I asked, surprised that he knew so much all of a sudden. We were in the same grade after all. Okay, so he liked the sciences more than I did. But surely that alone could not put him so far ahead of me. Mr. Kellin said so. Remember last week's physics lesson in which your class joined up with mine? I could not remember. I was probably asleep at the time. What should we do with this thing? I asked, anxious to move on, at the very least, from the topic of school lessons. Then I had an idea. Hey, why don't we show it to Dad? After all, he was a scientist at the old Pond University. He would know about this thing with the super strong magnetic field. No, Giran, Gomi tutted. If we show it to Dad, he'll say it's dangerous and that will be the end of that. No, we'll show it to Square. He'll know what it is. Square? Are you sure? I wanted to get rid of this thing as soon as possible. Yeah, Square knows everything. You know that. I knew that all right. Square was my best friend and a child prodigy where physics and other sciences were concerned. But how can we get this thing out of here? We can't even touch it. Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Gomi sounded crestfallen. He put his hands in his pockets and his forehead creased up as he stood deep in thought. I thought too, but sadly, nothing came to mind. "I've got an idea," Gomi declared excitedly. "What?" I asked. "We could carry it in a magnetic repellent." "What's a magnetic repellent?" I was getting confused by the minute and not liking it. Anything that breaks a magnetic field. It could be absolutely anything. Paper, leaves, even clothes. Clothes. That was our only option. We had no paper on us, and there were no leaves on the hill we were on. I took my shirt off. "Let's use this, Gomi," I said, handing him my shirt. "Are you sure?" he asked, eyeing me
What
with
would
a
Mum
bemused
say
look.
if you turned up without your shirt? We'll say we used it to wrap up the treasure, but that she wasn't allowed to look at the treasure because the aliens of the old world had instructed us not to show it to anyone. Gomi pulled a face at me. "I don't think she'll believe that, Giren, but we have no choice. Come on." He wrapped up my shirt around his arms and, bending down, attempted to pick up the object. Then all of a sudden, my shirt burst into flames. Screaming, Gomi let go of it. I jumped, looking at my shirt in disbelief. "My word," Gomi said, breathing rapidly. "This thing is unbelievable." We moved away from it, scared all of a sudden. "My shirt," I said, wondering what my mother would do. Now we couldn't even tell her the story of the old world aliens, just my luck. "I'm sorry about your shirt, Giren," Gomi said apologetically. "This thing has an even stronger magnetic field than I thought." "Yeah," I said. "You don't say, Gomi." "Let's get out of here," he said. "But what about it?" I asked. "Be serious, Giren. There's nothing we can do about it now. We can't take it with us. It could be dangerous." "All right." We made our way towards the foot of the hill. "What did you find?" Gomi asked me. I took my treasure from my pocket. Gomi was impressed, especially with the buckle. I showed him the broken mirror. It had a pink rim. It probably belonged to one of the many tourists who flocked to view Falrus from the top of the local hills.
All of a sudden, I began to feel heavy, as though someone were pulling me. Before I knew it, I was turning on my heels and heading back for the summit. I could not understand it, but something seemed to draw me, literally. "What are you playing at?" Gomi snapped at me impatiently, regarding me with confusion written all over his face. I tried to turn back, but I couldn't. "Gomi, I can't turn back, honest." The force grew stronger as I approached the spot where Gomi had found the strange little object. Gomi was running after me. "Come back, Giren, come back," he was shouting. But I couldn't stop. I did not stop until I got to within inches of the object, and then before I knew, I was face down on the ground. Gomi reached me just as I was sitting up. "What happened?" I asked, shaking my head as though to wake myself up. I seemed to have been under a spell. "Are you all right, Giren?" he asked me, helping me to my feet. I shook the dust off my clothes. The mirror had fallen to the ground. Gomi bent to pick it up. "Look at this," he screamed. I looked. There, on the mirror, was the face of a man in an army uniform. He did not seem to see me, but he was certainly looking at my face. I screamed. "Look!" Gomi cried. I looked at what he was pointing at. The strange matchstick had the projection of the same image of the uniformed man. Gomi and I did not need persuasion. We were at the bottom of the local hills before we could say, "Run for your life." Chapter 2. "Higher," he whispered, pointing the torch upwards. "If we make him taller, he'll be able to draw the curtains as well." But the taller he is, The heavier he becomes, and he'll be no use when his power runs out, Kefra warned. We'll have to make sure his weight is just right, so that he would be able to pick himself up on the starting energy. Yeah, you're right, Square said, and put out his torch. Kefra released the life-sized robot, and it came crashing onto Square's bed, making a dull thud. The two children held their breath, expecting their parents to come bursting into Square's room, demanding to know what they were doing up at midnight on Saturday night, when there was the early mass to attend on Sunday morning. 10 seconds passed. 10 seconds passed, and nothing happened. Then the lights on the landing came on, and the unmistakable sound of their mother's footsteps sounded outside Square's door. He hurried to pop his head outside the door. "Are you okay, Tawam?" she inquired. "What was that noise?" "I fell out of bed, Mother," he replied, making a show of massaging his head and rubbing his eyes. "I must have had a nightmare or something." "Well, say your prayers before you go to sleep now, wouldn't you?" his mother said, patting him on the head. "Good night, Tawam." "Good night, Mother," Square said, and watched his mother disappear into her room before turning back into his, heaving a deep sigh of relief. "Narrow escape," Kefra said. "You bet," Square replied. "For a minute there, I thought she was going to check up on you too." "We'd better do some more work on this project of ours if we are going to finish by next week," Kefra said. "No problem," Square said smugly. "It's your turn to take over the construction." "Yes, but you know more about electronics than I'll ever know, little brother. If only you could spell, I would trade brains with you any day." Square laughed, unable to hide his pleasure at her compliment. He was more modest than most 11-year-olds, but he just loved to be told what a whiz kid he was, especially by his 13-year-old sister. His mathematical prowess had won him the nickname T-squared, derived from the fact that his full name was Tawam Takenan, and therefore his initials TT. After a while, T-squared had been shortened to Square by his school friends. Kefra picked up the manual and began to browse through it using the light from the bedside lamp, while Square checked out the leads on the almost completed robot, making sure they were connected properly. "It looks like the control system will take longer than I thought," she said. "Listen to these instructions. Connect red lead to electrode 5, to which is connected the magnetic sensor of electrode 7. Switch off the voltage of the power source before connecting ammeter. Do not forget to measure the frequency of the electromagnetic waves emitted from the electron gun. Make sure the distance between electron source and the metal screen is 4.5 centimeters. Connect the blue lead to the other terminal on the ammeter." Anyone could tell this was your jargon. All right, I get your drift, Kefra," Square exclaimed. "We'll just have to deal with it some other time, when I'm not feeling so sleepy. Professor Crazy's brain will just have to wait until we have time to build it. Until then, he can just lie there and sleep, which is what I'm going to do right now. His name is not Professor Crazy, Square. How many times do I have to tell you it's Professor Potty? Whatever. Good night. Good night, and oh, have pots of nightmares, Kefra. Very funny, Square, ha ha. Not as funny as calling a robot Professor Potty. At least it's better than calling him Professor Crazy." Kefra crept out of Square's room and sneaked back quietly into her own room, hoping her parents would not hear her. It was just after 10 p.m. when Book Demba pulled into Hawes Avenue. He knew it was just after 10 because the light from the overly bright street lamps fell onto his car clock for a fraction of a second as he made the turn. It was cold and windy, and he wished he were in bed already. He felt as if a brick had been hung around his neck. Life wasn't fair, he thought to himself. If only this had happened 10 days from now, he would not be sweating as he was now. No, for he would be far away from the stress of Secret Investigation Service. He would be enjoying himself in some paradise spot somewhere along with his family, without a care in the world. But this had to happen. He couldn't believe his bad luck. Last year, he had had to give up his vacation in order to fill in for a colleague who had been ill during the Dionysi conference. Kenon had not been very happy about that, but she took it well. This time, he was sure she would be livid, and quite rightly so, he mused. He simply could not expect her to smile and take it this time. He had to find a way out. He just had to. But how? He ran over the events of the day in his mind. It had seemed such a normal day at first, as he drove for an hour, as usual, to Old Expond University. It was a bright, sunny July morning, no resemblance whatsoever to the weather now, Book reflected morosely. He always got there around 7 a.m. during weekdays when the rather drowsy city of Old Expond was just about stirring. Today was no exception, despite it being Saturday. He had admired the beautiful sunrise, as he always did, while his car nuclear radio played Songs of Dawn, which had been a present from Kenon last month. In the tall building which housed the science faculty of Falrus's largest university, he rode the elevator to the 10th floor where his lab was. He liked to check up on his research even before taking off his jacket. One of his biggest dreams was to come into the lab one morning and find the little white mouse and the nucleomagnetic transportron gone. If that were to happen, he would be the first man to use nucleomagnetic energy as a means of transport from one planet to another. He was already the first man to use a nucleomagnetic transportron to move an object from one place to another at the speed of light. He and his team of researchers had decided to go one step further. Interplanetary transport within seconds would be the ultimate goal in scientific advancement, and he couldn't even begin to appreciate the implications of such a feat. All he knew was that his would be the most advanced solar system ever to be born of the Big Bang. Book was not surprised when, after opening the small metallic cage in which he had placed a white mouse 2 months before, he found the creature nibbling at some crumbs. He decided to top up the animal's reserve of food before he forgot. He promptly did so, being careful to wear arm-length lead gloves to prevent any contact with background nucleomagnetic radiation each time he put his hand into the food compartment. Next, he went to the computer attached to his transportron, and after entering his password, he asked for destination. He had to wait 5 seconds before his old world appeared. He had to wait 5 seconds before Old World appeared on the screen. He smiled to himself. The project was at least functioning, even if the results he wanted had not yet materialized. There had only been 2 other destinations programmed into this computer. The first had been Miss Kando's handbag, and the other, the interior of a similar transportron in the Institute of Science and Technology in Loch Valley. Each time, the little white mouse had turned up at the appropriate venue within seconds of posting. He had gone into his office and taken off his jacket before going through the messages on his answering machine. Miss Kando was not required to come to work on Saturdays, although She always came when he or any of the other researchers asked her. As a result, all calls to the physics department during the weekend were received on his nuclear telephone, not hers. There were usually many calls, even in the early hours of the morning, as indicated by the nuclear telephone clock. To Book, this was hardly surprising, as he was head of the physics department at Falrus's most prestigious university, and everyone wanted his opinion on this research project or that publication. And 2 years before, he had taken on a special project, the one involving the old world. He was a man with a lot of responsibility. Although all the members of his research team were supposed to be at work on Saturdays ever since the new project started, he never insisted that they were on time. So halfway through the messages, when he heard Balit Droba come in, he did not comment on the fact that he was already half an hour late. "Morning, Book," Balit said as he came through to Book's office. He was short and fat, with a jolly face and a grey-white hair. A bit like Father Christmas. Book liked and trusted this man. He was untidy and disorganized, but beneath all that external chaos resided a brilliant mind. Book considered him one of the best physicists he had ever worked with. Balit, Book acknowledged, smiling. They were so accustomed to each other that formalities were out of the question. "Any messages that would make me smile for once?" Balit asked, extracting a chocolate bar from his briefcase. "None that say, 'Hey, Bal, your fairy godmother is in town. What would you like?' if that's what you mean." Book had the "haven't I heard the same joke time and time again" expression on his face. Balit gave him a "don't you get tired of making the same old jokes time and time again" look. "Well, my mommy always did say I was too much of an optimist," Balit said, laughing. "Want some chocolate?" he asked Book unenthusiastically and proceeded to put the whole chocolate bar in his mouth, even before Book could refuse. With his mouth full, he asked, "Anything interesting then?" "Just the usual. Parley Demk from the Vuntash Science Base in Balnanti wanted to know whether Oldex Pond would be represented in the annual science debate on Channel 9 this year. A man from the Lockville Institute asked if we would repeat their recent experiment on neurophysical electroemissions. One of the metallurgy boys whose lecture 3 of our students disrupted on Wednesday said, 'Are we not going to do anything about it?' And Tundi is calling an examiners meeting for Monday lunchtime. How's that for starters?" "You mean there's more?" Balit made a show of being surprised. It was difficult, considering he was chewing with his mouth full at the same time. In reply, Book turned on the answering machine again. A woman's voice came on. "This is Yani Akoli of the SIS Operation Animal Kingdom. The Army Defense Unit representative would like Grizzly Bear to contact him as soon as possible. It is an emergency, Grizzly Bear. This could involve your team, so get them alerted. Thank you." Book turned off the machine and looked down at Balit, who looked like he had just seen a ghost. "What's going on?" he asked, his jaw quivering, not so much from dread as from chewing too fast, robot fashion. "Search me. I haven't had a call from the SIS head office in ages." "Well, what are you waiting for, Grizzly Bear? Ring the army person and I'll get our so-called research team out of bed." Balit hauled his weighty bulk out of Book's office and went to the common office next door, still chewing. Book went to his jacket, hanging from a hook behind his door, and extracted a little nuclear notepad from its pocket. In this little gadget, which he kept on his person at all times, were all the nuclear telephone numbers and code names he needed to hand. They were all to do with Operation Animal Kingdom. He winced as the thought of losing his nuclear notepad struck him. What would he do? He made a mental note to review security procedures where Operation Animal Kingdom was concerned. He couldn't believe Jan Niakoli had addressed him by his code name on his answering machine. What if someone else, like Miss Kandor, had unwittingly accessed his private messages? She was his secretary, granted, but nonetheless, this was a top-secret mission and a potentially risky one. One never knew where things could lead. He flicked through countless names rapidly until he came to the one he wanted. He nodded to himself with satisfaction. He had remembered the Army Defense Unit representative's code name. It was Giant Panda. Knowing the code name made it easier for him to trace the number. When he found it in a different section of his nuclear notepad, he went to his desk nuclear telephone and dialed the number, sitting down heavily in his swivel chair as he did so. While it was ringing, he wondered what could be the cause of this sudden interruption of his comparatively stress-free Saturday. Jan Niakoli, alias Curiosity Cat, had been right, of course, not to have given him Giant Panda's number over the nuclear phone. A voice came over the line, a stern voice that reeked of authority. "Hello? This is the Army Defense Unit. Can I help you?" Book knew who it was. He was surprised he had answered the nuclear phone himself. Gosh, this is serious business, he thought glumly. It was slowly sinking in that this was no ordinary SIS conversation he was about to have. "Rattlesnake, this is Grizzly Bear. I was asked to contact Giant Panda." For some reason, Book's throat felt dry, his voice hoarse. He coughed to clear his throat. "Wait a minute, Grizzly Bear. I'll put him on. We've been expecting your call." Oh God, here we go, Book thought. He had to wait a few seconds before the deep voice of the Army Defense Unit representative came on. Book could tell he was flustered. "There's trouble, Grizzly Bear," he said gruffly, and Book could imagine sweat on his forehead. "Our man at Krambeti detected radiation from an unidentified source beyond Desimac. He contacted us immediately. His theory is that they are coming, but I would rather not believe that, would you?" It seemed more of a statement to Book than a question. "Who are coming, sir?" Book asked, confused. "Wake up, Grizzly Bear. The guys from the old world, of course." "Oh," was all Book could muster. He was beginning to get the picture now. All his fears were being confirmed. He began to feel a little queasy. "Are you there?" The suddenness jolted Book into alertness. "Yes," he said quietly. "Yes, sir, I'm here. I want you and your team, first of all, to go and check this out. I won't be making any plans till you get back. I'm hoping you'll come back and tell me it's a false alarm, but it's only a hope. How soon can you get moving?" "Right away, sir. Kingfisher is getting the others ready." "All right. I want you in Chroma by 4 o'clock this afternoon if it's bad news. I'm warning all the others to get ready for an emergency meeting in case you have bad news. Give me a call as soon as you have any news and bring your team along if necessary. Catch you later, Grizzly Bear." "Yes, sir." "Hey, Grizzly Bear." "Yes, sir." "Good luck." "Thank you, sir." The line went dead. Book remained in his seat for a minute, squeezing his forehead with his right thumb and forefinger, as he always did when under pressure. Bartlett was still on the nuclear phone in his office. It took him several more minutes before he was finished. Book finally heard his familiar footsteps as he made his way towards Book's office. He sat down opposite Book, looking as weary as Book felt. Book gave him the gist of the situation and they both set to work gathering files and documents. Sitting in his car, Book remembered that even at this point he was vaguely optimistic. He and Ballet had speculated on the outcome of their imminent investigation whilst waiting for Dr. Saaki Volten, Dr. Dovania Suvanas, and Dr. Bolsane Venistas to arrive. Happily, they all arrived within half an hour, and before long, the party of 5 was on its way to Krambeti Galaxy Observation Institute by car. Krambeti was little more than a village. Being right on the bank of the River Yeni, it appeared to be more important than it actually was, simply because of its accessibility. In reality, it was home to only a population of over 8,000 people. In reality, it was home to only a population of just over 8,000 people. However, it was also home to the only astrophysical center in Falrus. Book could remember that no time was wasted at all once he and his team were in the institute. He could remember being ushered into a large, darkened room with 2 huge screens in it. Larando Pachev, the man who had discovered the unwelcome radiation, gave a brief presentation about his findings, businesslike as usual. The 5 visitors then set to work, quizzing him, doing their best to prove him wrong, making him alter confounding variables such as presumed distance from the source and the degree of sensitivity of his measuring devices. Larando Pachev's findings stood the test. By lunchtime, Book and his team decided to admit defeat. Whichever way you looked at it, there was an unidentified source of nucleomagnetic waves at the far side of line Desimac. The next 2 hours had been frantic for the team. Boog had to inform Giant Panda and other members of the investigation team at Lokveli, Barnanti and Dionysi. Everyone wanted a breakdown of the findings yesterday. Boog had to calm them down. Someone had to keep control of the pandemonium looming above their heads. Finally, at 20 to 3, the Oldex Pond team set off for Chroma in Korponti, where the Army Defense Unit was located. At exactly 5 minutes to 4, they and 58 other scientists were assembled in the big lecture theatre affectionately referred to as the Green Room because of its apple green curtains, wallpaper and carpet. Yani Akoli, who had been sitting in the front row, got up and made her way to the little platform at the front of the theatre where a PowerPoint projector had been set up. She ran her hand through her hair and regarded the group of anxious faces before her. There was no need to clap her hands to attract their attention. All eyes were firmly on her. "Ladies and gentlemen, can you hear me?" she inquired. She had chosen not to use the microphone before her, as only a quarter of the room was occupied. A gentle murmur of probable affirmation greeted her. Yania smiled nervously before continuing. "May I use this opportunity to thank you all for coming to Chroma at such short notice," she began. "I know you must all be tired and eager to get this meeting over and done with, so I shall be as brief as possible." A man at the back began to say, "Here, here," but when a few people turned back to stare at him, he thought the better of it. Yania pressed on without blinking, pretending not to have heard. "You must all be wondering why this meeting has been called today. Well, as you all know, we have been investigating the possibility of life in the old world. Ever since Professor Veltam Bradakas proved beyond reasonable doubt that physical conditions outside Line Desimac were indeed conducive to life as we know it. We also know that all mass beyond Line Desimac was born of the same Big Bang that gave birth to our part of the galaxy, and that which includes the only other home to living creatures, Earth. This means that if life does exist in this uncomfortably close half-galaxy, then our source of solar energy, our sun, would come under attack. I don't need to tell you this. You all know this. Yanua paused for effect. A pin dropping at this moment would have been considerably loud, maybe even ear-splitting. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is life outside line Decimark, our sun would be sucked of all its solar energy, and we would be left with nothing. Our resources would be taken away from us. That is why we were so worried when Proud Peacock at the Crown Betty Institute detected nucleomagnetic waves. That is why we are here today. We need to protect ourselves from extinction by these unknown life forms. And we do know now that they are life forms. Only a source of nucleomagnetic energy can emit nucleomagnetic waves, and energy cannot beget itself. I'm sure I don't have to remind anyone here of the first law of thermodynamics. One or two people feigned ignorance for comic effect. Yane Akoli again chose to ignore. So, our conclusion is, someone somewhere in the old world has found energy. We hope that that energy is not coming from our solar system, but it may well be, for their sun is only the size of our moon. I think you will all agree with me when I say that we would like to keep our sun to ourselves. There was clapping and a low rumble of laughter as Yanya paused for breath a second time since she got up to speak. It took a little while for the green room to quieten down again. Yanya wiped her forehead. Bukdemba, sitting in the second row, was squeezing his temples. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the chairman of Operation Animal Kingdom and president of the Falrus Special Investigation Service, Remidan Bisvali, alias Giant Panda. Again, there was a roar of clapping as Yanya left the platform and returned to her seat. The Army Defense Unit representative walked to the platform. Although he was 57 years old, he looked 35. His black hair showed no signs of graying, and his build was that of an athlete. He was at least 6 feet 8 inches tall, and his shoulders as powerful as they were broad. With the surprising elegance of a gymnast, he settled himself on the platform and waited for his audience to be silent. Finally, he cleared his throat, and, resting his hands on either side of the pedestal, he began. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice was unexpectedly high-pitched on this occasion. As Curiosity Cat has already explained, I would not want to keep you here any longer than necessary. It's Saturday afternoon, and there are lots of things you would rather be doing. Grizzly Bear and his team at Old X Pond have already confirmed Proud Peacock's findings. So we are sure, as far as one can be, that we have a problem on our hands. We have to work as fast as we can. Any of you currently conducting research experiments not connected to the SIS should forget them and join forces with those who are. If necessary, move town. I especially want as many people as possible on Grizzly Bear's project. Nucleomagnetic interplanetary transport would have to be a crucial part of our operation. If we can get people to the old world, half our problems would be solved. As of yet, I don't want the press involved in this. They are only going to go public, and that's the last thing we need. If I feel things have come to a head, I shall contact them myself. I hope this is clear. I have no choice but to declare for members of this operation a 90-hour week from now on. If you have a vacation coming up, cancel it. This assignment requires the utmost cooperation. Finally, before you leave, I would like you to let Yania know which SIS project you are willing to join if you have not already done so. Thank you. There was no clapping as Remid and Bisvali walked off the platform. Everyone was looking solemn, as Book could recall. Even those with a tendency to humor in the face of adversity looked grim as one by one they began to leave, some heading for the little queue forming near Yania's desk. Book had helped Yania Kohli. By the time the last name had been taken down, it was almost 6 p.m. After leaving the green room, Book and a few others had met with Remiden in his private office, where he had briefed them on his immediate plans. By the time the meeting had finished, Book was starving and his wristwatch. Declared 8 o'clock. It was only then that he realized with pangs of guilt that amidst all the excitement of the day, he had forgotten to tell Kinnon that he would be late. He had only intended to pop in to work this morning. How long ago it all seemed. He had called her immediately. As usual, she was very understanding. He did not go into details. He just told her that something had happened and that he would be home around 10. He wondered exactly how many times he had said the same words to her. Probably best not counted, he pondered ruefully. He would make it up to her. One day. He wondered how many times he had thought that too. Probably best not to count that too. The journey to Driss had been uneventful. It had been too dark even to admire the local hills. The cold had not helped his morale either. The welcome sight of Hawes Avenue was the only redeeming factor. But the days ahead loomed up gloomily in Book's mind. Having thought about the events of the day, he now realized that there was no way out. Operation Animal Kingdom could not proceed without Grizzly Bear. As he pulled into the driveway of number 37, he could see 7-year-old Pargo standing just outside the door on the front porch. Pargo was a star when it came to welcoming his beloved dad home. No matter how tired or moody Book felt, little Pargo's "Daddy's Home" song and dance refreshed and lifted him. "Who's going to give Dad a big hug?" he called out. With his arms wide open, Pargo came flying into his arms, delighted. Book produced a lollipop for the little boy. "Thank you, Dad," he said in a happy voice, and sped indoors ahead of Book, clearly delighted with the outcome of his mission. Doulis came and took his briefcase and jacket, a much more subdued event without much ceremony. Book wondered if it would be like this with Pargo one day. He thought not. Doulis had always been reserved, even when he was Pargo's age. It had always been a handshake and a grunt of mutual respect and admiration when he came home, a nod and a smile if circumstances called for a touch of emotion. Book had no complaints, though. Doulis was a good boy, an excellent son. And besides, of all his sons, he was also his best emotional mirror image. The twins were somewhere in between Pargo and Doulis, where his emotional relationship with them was concerned. There was a welcoming aroma of dinner in the air. It reminded Book that he was still hungry. There had been no time to stop and eat during his drive home. Just enough time to stop for Pargo's lollipop. That was mandatory. Mrs. Demba was in the kitchen serving supper. Book headed in her direction. He wondered what reception would greet him when he saw her. He needn't have worried. The smile was all the encouragement he needed for advancement. A hug, and 2 pecks later, he was ushered by Pargo into the dining room, not so much quickly as urgently. He was informed that the twins were upstairs studying. Strange news as far as those two were concerned, Book thought. Any suggestions of getting them down for a night off from homework, however, were not encouraged. Kenan's look of exasperation as she told him of the boy's excitable behavior told him all he needed to know. Studying was a euphemism for stay in your room and don't bother Mom. So how was the day? Kenan asked him once Pargo's repeated requests for a bedtime story, delivered by Dad, and Dad only, were granted. Doolis was somewhere in the house. Book was never quite sure where, and the twins were evidently still up, judging from the noise coming from their room. What was it you were saying about an emergency? Book told her about the findings at Crambetty, not going into too much detail about the implications of the discovery. He ended by saying matter-of-factly, I might have to pass on this year's summer vacation, Kenan. The team needs every man they can get. He paused, watching to see her reaction. The expression on her face changed. The sunny disposition turned to stormy in a matter of seconds. It was a frightening vision for Book to witness. But last year, the same thing happened. An emergency. There's always an emergency when your vacation comes up. She was more disappointed than angry. Book could tell. This was not quite the reaction he was hoping for or had expected. In many ways, he preferred angry. But she did have a point. It was such a long time since they had had a family vacation together. You go on and have a good vacation, Kenan, he said, desperately trying to make eye contact with her but failing miserably. It didn't help that she was looking down at his now empty plate instead of at him. Go enjoy yourselves. Go enjoy yourselves, you and the boys. Don't worry about me, I'll be fine. He knew it was the wrong thing to say. He knew it even before she sighed in the manner he had come to recognize as being the prologue of a protracted ticking off. Problem was, he didn't have a whole lot of alternatives. At least, none that came to mind right now. His paltry attempt was not well received. She shot him a look of indignation. We'll be okay, Book, but what about you? You need a vacation even more than the rest of us. I'd be happy to sit at home all summer, but you, look at you, Book, you're exhausted. You've been working so hard, even doing other people's work for them. You need at least a week's rest. It would be criminal for them to ask any more of you. You need at least a week's rest. It would be criminal for them to ask any more of you. It was Book's turn to sigh. Kenan, I understand your concerns, and I appreciate them, but this is important not only for Falrus, but also for the entire galaxy. I promise you, when all of this is over, we'll go somewhere nice and we'll take a month off. Believe me, Kenan, if I had a choice in the matter, we would be all out of this region by now. But unfortunately, there is nothing I can do. Neither of them had noticed Pargo slip down. Neither of them had noticed Pargo slip back downstairs, clutching Rippo, his favorite toy. We are going to Pasquando, aren't we, Dad? Kenan went over to the little boy and patted him on the head. Of course, Pargo, but Dad can't come along with us. She was smiling at him. Dad's got himself a top-secret assignment, so he can't come with us. What's top secret? Pargo inquired. It means he can't tell you about it. Kenan scooped Pargo up in her arms, careful not to drop Rippo. And what are you doing downstairs anyway, young man? Who gave you permission to come downstairs after Dad had put you to bed? Her tone was half playful, but Pargo's luck was about to run out. And did you do your homework this evening? Poor Pargo. A guilty expression appeared on his face as he twiddled his thumbs uncomfortably. Book gave him a stern look. Haven't you done your homework? Why, that's unlike you, Pargo. Remember the rules. You do your homework before play. Otherwise, no lollies from Old X Pond. Yes, Dad, I'm sorry, Dad. He was close to tears. How he hated Dad to be disappointed with him. Pago was out of the dining room in a trice. Book nibbled on a grape from the fruit bowl. I meant what I said, he said to Kenan. I'll join you and the kids as soon as I am rid of this assignment. It's become some sort of enigma. On the one hand, it seems a straightforward combat strategy would solve everything, but I have a feeling everything is not what it seems. There is something else to it. Boog sighed again. Anyway, it should be over soon. I can't wait to join you and the boys at the beach in Pascuando in a few weeks. Upstairs in my room, I looked up Strange Objects of Scientific Interest, SOSI, on my computer. Several descriptions appeared on the screen with their names. Maroon-colored bulb with stainless steel surface used to power nucleomagnetic light sources. Energy rating 250 million kilowatts. Generic name nucleomagnetic synetron. Radioactive black box with unknown light source within. Energy rating 1,000 kilowatts. First discovered at the bottom of the Visual Z. First discovered at the bottom of the Visual C 55 years ago by Professor Kush at the Crown Betty Galaxy Observation Institute. Approved name Kush's Black Box. Other names Phonar, NR Box. Possible identification category remains of a quasar seen every 5 years just outside line Decimac. Emitter of ultraviolet rays equal in power to those of the sun, discovered shortly after the destruction of the Midas body. Generic name Midas mass, also called nebulactic phenomenon, could be a tearaway constituent of the galaxy containing Earth. Earth? I exclaimed. I had heard of that planet somewhere before. Now, where was it? Oh yes, Mr. Kellin had mentioned it. Apparently, it was a very interesting planet. I knew it was much bigger than Falrus. It was the only planet in the second galaxy that had evidence of life, apparently. Living beings like us lived there. A long time ago, I had asked my father why we could not go to Earth and say hello to the Earthlings. But my father had laughed and said it was too far away. Over 3 billion light years away. Over 3 billion light years away. And these people were our only neighbors in the universe. It had only been discovered 100 years ago that there was life in the second galaxy. It had come as a shock to us in the first galaxy, but the evidence was indeed compelling. Grandpa said his grandpa had told him about it. A scientist working at the Cranberry Institute had discovered Werner lines accidentally while he was working on a giant electromagnetic sensor. It had been such a breakthrough in those days. Since then, much more had been discovered about Earth. Dad was adamant that one day people from the first galaxy would be able to go to Earth. That is to say, as soon as line Decimac was broken. I had often wondered about line Decimac. It was an imaginary line separating us from the other half of the first galaxy. I had heard that Earth in the second galaxy had a similar imaginary line. They called it the equator or something like that. I wasn't clear on that. I would have to ask that again. No one knew what was beyond line Decimac. Dad had often told us some of the theories. One group at Chroma University insisted that it was a mass of vapor, not a solid entity like ours. Mr. Kellin said that in every galaxy there had to be a solid part, which was inhabited by living beings, and a gaseous component, which was people-free, as was the case in several planets in the second galaxy. Scientists at the Cranberry Institute had argued, though, that if life existed in the second galaxy, why couldn't there be life just outside Decimark, on the doorstep of planet Falrus? Anyway, the average man on planet Falrus had his own ideas about the rest of the first galaxy. We called it the Old World, OLD, being an acronym for Outside Line Decimark. Many a child was often threatened that if they misbehaved, the horrible aliens from the Old World would come and get them. Gomi and I had outgrown such threats, but they still worked on Pago. To Gomi and me, the Old World represented a world of adventure and heroism. We went in search of treasure hidden by the Old World aliens. We rescued beautiful young ladies captured by the Old World monsters. And we defended our planet from the evil warriors of the Old World. It was a magical fantasy. I often dreamt that one day I would be knighted by King Hypok on the highest point of Yoda's mountains, to the admiration and cheers of all the people in Falrus. I would be given a medal for bravery and chivalry and for saving the planet from the tyrants of the Old World. Afterwards, there would be a big party in Yoda's palace for me, at which my family would be guests of honor. That night, I had a similar dream. This time, I was in school training for the end-of-year sprint with my classmates. I could see myself in the gym running from one wall to the opposite, with Mr. Buana's loud whistle stopping me every 5 runs for a 2-minute rest. I could see myself in the races on sports day itself. Square and I led in every heat, with me winning in the final one to the cheers of all my classmates. I could see myself being carried up in the air by my friends as Mr. Buana handed me a card with a Q on it to indicate that I had qualified to represent my class in the finals. I saw myself reach out for Square and hug him as he too was handed a card marked Q.
Chapter 3. It was Sunday afternoon. Right after Mass, I was sent to my room to finish off my history homework. As soon as I finished said homework, I typed it out on the computer, happy at last. Having printed it out, I rubbed my hands together and puffed out my chest. Then I let out a big sigh. It felt like Christmas. For that history homework was my final end-of-term project. Now my life was my own. This project on the history of the War of Lockville had taken practically all of the weekend. Now I was free, and did I know what to do with my freedom? I went downstairs. Gomi and Doulis were sitting watching nuclear television. They had been there all afternoon whilst I slaved away in my room. I felt a pang of envy. Perhaps it was unreasonable of me. They, of course, had done all their work by Friday night. "Where's Mom?" I asked Doulis. "In the kitchen." "Have you done your homework yet, Dumbo?" Doulis mocked. "I sure have," I said triumphantly as I went in search of my mother. No longer was I going to be held prisoner by homework. "I am off to see Square to discuss a matter of top priority," I said to both of them. "Do you want to come, Gomi?" He raised a sleepy eyebrow at me. "We haven't had lunch yet, Gieren," he said lazily. "Can't we go after lunch?" "Gomi, this is important." Remember the magnetic object we found on Friday? I can't wait to tell Square about it. Are you coming with me or not? This was a matter of great urgency. Only my history homework had prevented me from going straight to Square's. What magnetic object? Dulles asked casually. Oh, it's this object we found on the local hills. We thought it might be of scientific interest, so I'm off to tell Square about it. Dulles laughed his big brother laugh. Let me get this straight, he said with measured cynicism. You think something you found on the local hills is of scientific interest? Yeah, Dulles, as a matter of fact, I do. Come off it, Kieran. Don't be so stupid. I'm not, Dulles, I said defiantly. Gomi saw it too. It shone like a metal and it had a super strong magnetic field that could burn through clothes. Why do you think my shirt was burned when we returned from the local hills? Dulles looked at me as though I were crazy.
He was highly amused by my story, and Gomi was not helping me much either. Mom's not going to let you off before lunch, he pointed out. Gomi, do you want to come or not? I asked him. Not. I'm too tired. You go off and see Square. I don't think the object is that important anyway. It may just be part of a robot or something. Tell me what Square says, if Mum lets you go. I knew he didn't want to come. All he wanted to do was laze around all day. All right, if that's what he wanted, that was up to him. I left my brothers and went to the kitchen. Mum was there preparing our traditional Sunday dinner. She looked happy to see me for a reason I quickly grasped. A volunteer at last, she said, smiling at me. It must be my lucky day or something. Oh no, I groaned inwardly. She's got it all wrong. Talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Mom, I said, whilst thinking of a quick getaway plan. The garden outside looked inviting. It was a nice, warm day, and I wanted to be out, at Square's. One could sit outside and discuss recent technological breakthroughs. Well, Square would do the talking, and I the listening. May I go to Square's? It was a risk, but I had to take it. I had to see Square. Kieran, you know you can't. It's lunchtime, and he'll be at the table, where you should be too. Kieran, you know you can't. It's lunchtime, and he'll be at table, where you should be too. Besides, you are needed around here. You can go and see him after lunch, but not before you've done the washing up. It's Gomi's turn today, I protested. It wasn't fair. Yes, but he always helps you when it's your turn, so you'll help him. It was Mum's final word, and I knew it. Oh, Mum, please, I pleaded. Worth one last shot, surely. I won't stay long, I promise. No, Kieran, you may go after lunch, and that's that. You don't deserve any favors from me, not after burning your shirt and then not doing your homework when you were supposed to. Now go and lay the table and ask Dulles or Gomi to go and fetch your father and Pago from next door. Lunch is almost ready. I walked away from the kitchen with a slumped back. Gomi went off to find Dad. Gomi went off to find Dad, and I to lay the table just as Mom ordered. I was silent throughout lunch. I gobbled down my food as quickly as I could, and then dashed off to Prolino Street as soon as the washing up was done. Gomi still did not want to come. There was some goofy action film on nuclear television. Square was in his treehouse when I got there. He had built it himself 3 years ago, It was complete with electricity, powered by solar energy and furniture. It was almost as big as the garden shed. He was working on a new project to provide the treehouse with turbojets and propellers. I thought it was ridiculous, but he said wait and see, so I was. And I knew the result would be spectacular. Square was just that kind of person. "Hey, Square," I yelled to him when his mother took me out to the garden. "Hi, Kieran, come up." A muffled voice called out to me. I went up the ladder. Square was on all fours amidst clutter. Square was on all fours amidst a clutter of nuts and bolts, wires and microchips, circuits and slabs of metal. "What's all this, Square?" I asked, bemused. "This place looks like a crazy scientist's workshop." Square gave me a baffled look. "I am a crazy scientist, Kieran," he said unashamedly. "And so is he." He pointed to a mass of this entangled leads and what appeared to me to be a bric-a-brac. "What is that, Square?" I asked my friend, eyes wide and open-mouthed. It looked so high-tech. I hadn't seen anything like it before. None of Square's inventions so far had impressed me as much. "I give up on you sometimes, Kieran," Square said, shaking his head. "This is a robot. Not quite finished, but nevertheless a robot. I told you..." "I thought you would at least recognize one. Haven't I taught you anything?" "A robot," I gasped. "Square built a robot? Single-handedly? You built this all by yourself?" I looked at the creation. Yeah, it was a robot, all right. I could vaguely make out a kind of face on the thing. "Well, Kefra helped, but it was my invention." "Impressed?" Square smiled proudly. "I sure was." "You're more of a genius than I thought," I said, and meant it. "No need to go over the top, Kieran," Square said, shrugging off my compliment. He patted me on the back. "If you hung around me long enough, you might learn something." "Quit being modest, Square. I might just burst into tears in sheer admiration of this most enviable virtue of yours." He pulled a face at me and I laughed. Good old Square. I helped him assemble the robot while we talked about school, his inventions, our training for sports day. Then I remembered. "Hey, Square, Gomi and I found something you might be interested in," I said to him, as he fitted yet another circuit into Professor Potty's brain. "Yeah, what's that?" he asked absent-mindedly. I told him about the strange object on the local hills. Square sat up as I spoke. "This thing was hot?" "Yes, Gomi said it had a strong magnetic field. It burned my shirt, so we decided to leave it there. I thought you might know something about it." I told him about the mirror. Square looked at me intently as I spoke, as though trying to remember something. Then suddenly he got up and climbed down from the treehouse. "Square, where are you going?" I was dumbfounded by his reaction to my story. What on Falrus was the matter with him? "Follow me," Square shouted back at me. He was already down the ladder and into the kitchen. I followed, wondering what was going on through his head. Mind. Whatever it was, I knew it'd be interesting. Square took me to his bedroom, which looked just as bad as his treehouse. More of Professor Potty's parts lay everywhere. All sorts of weird-looking equipment and gadgets were scattered all over the bed and floor. Where did he get all this stuff from, I wondered. Books on inventions and physics, ideas and experiments were spread out all over. It appeared to me that Square had been reading more than 100 books at the same time, It was possible with Square. He never failed to amaze me. He headed for a pile of books covered in dust in what would normally be called a wardrobe. But with Square, normal vocabulary did not always apply. Book after book was thrown out of the old wardrobe. I tried to read some of the titles. The Physics of Quantum Energy, The Theory and Experimental Evidence of Differential Rotation, How to Build the Perfect Robot, Logic Gates, Gateway to Logic. Only Square could read all these books and remain sane. Well, got it, Square declared triumphantly as a huge book was pulled out. It was about the size of a small trunk. I gaped at it. You read that? He couldn't even lift it. I began to be seriously concerned for my friend. Square dragged out the book and opened it. He browsed through a particular page while I looked on, wondering if he really was normal, or was it that I had simply grown accustomed to his strange ways over the years and therefore in a dubious position to judge his degree of normality. "Yep, here it is," he said happily, breathless with excitement. What you described up in the tree house sounded like an ultra-wave nucleomagnetic interplanetary spy telescope, Kieran, he said, nodding to emphasize the importance of his words. I thought it might be that, but I had to check it out. Wow, do you know what this means? No. What does it mean, Square? I hadn't the faintest. It means that line Decimark has been broken. He stared at me, no doubt unimpressed by my blank expression. This is big stuff, Kieran. All the theories about the old advanced life. All the theories about the old world have been shattered by your discovery. There is highly advanced life beyond line Decimark. Are you saying we could be attacked or something? It was beginning to dawn on me what Square was on about. At last, the fog was lifting ever so slowly. Right first time, Kieran. You know what? That man in uniform you saw in the mirror could be some sort of military tyrant. You didn't know it, but you probably temporarily saved the planet. How? I asked, back in the mist. Well, ultra-wave nucleomagnetic energy, funnily enough, is reflected back by only one surface, reflective glass. In other words, a mirror. That means that whatever that spy telescope was spying on has been blocked from its view for as long as the mirror is within its magnetic field. You did leave it near the object, didn't you? Square asked, suddenly frantic. Yeah, we dropped everything and ran. Square, how did you know about this thing? I mean, I tried to look it up on my computer, but there was no mention of it. I got this book from the Chroma Institute when my uncle went there on sabbatical. It has all the latest theories and technological advances, but what I like best are the hypotheses on future innovations. Your object is even mentioned briefly, although it hasn't been named and defined because no one has seen one before. No one before you and Gomi, that is. The system is simple. The scientists who compiled this book followed a simple rule, and that was to ask themselves what would be the most likely trend in scientific advancement, and simply followed it. As time went on, they predicted more and more ideas, and simultaneously looked back on the previous predictions and assessed their progress on how far from the mark they had been. It's an ingenious idea. I wish I had thought of it myself. It takes a lot of courage and hard work to follow through with the idea, though. It's like taking a leap in the dark. You never know where you're going to end up. But these scientists stuck to their guns, and now you and I have benefited from their work. as I am sure academics like your father have too. This was incredible stuff. What do we do now? I asked Square. Do you think I should tell my father about it? He may want to investigate it. You never know. He might find something useful. Gomi thought it best to ask you first. No, that would be a mistake, Kieran. Just leave it to me. I'll read around it and then get back to you, hopefully, before the end of the week. We'll figure out how to remove it from the local hills by ourselves. If you tell your father and he finds out how important it is in terms of the safety of the planet, he'll forbid you to go near it. This could be our adventure, Kieran. We could investigate this thing ourselves and find out what's going on. Think about it, Kieran. We could save our planet by ourselves. The thought appealed to me. My recurring dream was beginning to play itself in my mind again. I could see the newspaper headlines. Darkanan and Demba save planet Falrus from advanced life forms beyond line Decimac. Knighthood in store for the two young heroes. But I had one reservation. What if it was too dangerous for the likes of Square and me to deal with it on our own? What if it was too hot to handle and we put ourselves at risk? Square, I don't think we should do this, I said gloomily. We could lose our lives, and I would never be able to forgive myself if that happened. Wait a minute, I'd be dead. I shivered involuntarily. Square, please, this is crazy. Let me tell my father about it. At least let me mention it. It might turn out to be nothing. On the other hand, it could lead to something big, in which case we would be grateful for his help. Square looked at me disappointed. Don't you trust me, Kieran? I've told you, it's our big adventure. Summer vacation is coming up soon. We'll have all the time in the world to check things out. I'll abandon all my other projects and treat this one as top priority. Trust me. Square smiled and patted my shoulders. A bit too hard for my liking. I almost fell over. If you're sure, I conceded grudgingly. I was anything but sure myself. Of course I'm sure, he said. It's all under control. That night, I lay in bed agonizing over whether I had done the right thing or not. Eventually, I decided that I had. Square knew what he was doing, and I needed an adventure. This summer vacation was going to be the best I had ever had. All of a sudden, I couldn't wait. With butterflies taking off in my stomach, I reluctantly went to sleep. It took 2 hours before I finally made it to dreamland, or shall I say, before Sir Giran Demba took off on his winged horse to rescue pretty Falrusian princesses in distress beyond line Decimac. Commander Bonzok was smiling. He loved it when the president praised him. Everyone loved to be praised by the president. It was bad news to be in the president's bad books. We have the next group of exchange candidates ready for inspection, sir, he said with an evil chuckle. Proceed. We have here exchange number 29, Jajan Kotak from the 7th District to replace Faran Moras of Red Rule Koponti, sir. Reason? Faran's father is a member of their Special Investigation Service. He will prove to be a useful source of information. Proceed. Number 30, Pisina Fario from the 8th District for Kefra Takenan of Dris Koponti. Reason? Kefra's brother is a child prodigy. He knows all there is to know about nuclear magnetic technology. If it's the boy who is the genius, why take his sister? The president was curt. You see, sir,
He's a stubborn child. He would never yield to our methods of information extraction. We thought his sister would be more, shall we say, cooperative. Get the boy. Yes, sir. Proceed. Number 31, Bentel Vosh from the 2nd District for Giren Demba from Dres, Koponti. Giren's father is the second in command of the so-called Operation Animal Kingdom. We could use his son to stop him in his tracks. Why not get the first in command's son? Remiden Bisvali has no son, sir. Then get his daughter. His only daughter left home when she was 15. She is now living in a place called Vizmi, and is not on speaking terms with her father. She wouldn't know anything, sir. This Demba boy is the only son of his father? This Demba boy is the only son of his father's? No, sir, but he is the friend of Tawam Takenan, brother of Kefra. His twin brother would also be a suitable candidate. But as you did say only one child from each family, we decided to pick Giren, who would seem the better choice. By no means the brightest, but he is certainly the most interesting of the Demba boys. And there is a lot he could tell us about his father's project. Yes, the president agreed. We should only take one child per family. We don't want to arouse any suspicions, do we, Bonsok? No, sir. Proceed. Exchange number 32. Kra Zigoskas from the 4th District for Bundash Hepwat. Reason? Bundash is the heir to the throne of Falrus. The king could stop the special investigation if we asked him to, sir. Excellent, Bonsok. You do have some brains, my boy. Very good. Thank you, sir. Exchange number. Tell me about the rest later. Run over your scheme again. I want to make sure I know exactly what's going on in that mind of yours. Commander Bonsok grinned, pleased with events so far. He pumped up his chest. Well, sir, it's like this. As you know, our next-door neighbors in planet Falrus believe that when the Big Bang took place many years ago, it gave birth to their solar system and ours, as well as that containing Earth. What they have failed to realize, Your Excellency, is that our solar system, too, is occupied by living beings, and more importantly, there was life in our half of the galaxy before the Big Bang. Our ancestors from the district of Benj escaped from the ruins of their homeland to settle in the first of the 10 districts just outside Landesimag, which separates us from planet Falrus. Having advanced technology at their disposal, our ancestors took over from the rulers of the district people, whose half of the galaxy had just begun its life. We became dictators as a necessity, not by choice. Our subjects have come a long way since 4 billion years ago, and we don't want them to outdo us now that they too have acquired knowledge of science. On the contrary, sir, we want to expand our territory. There are only 2 more areas where life exists in the whole universe, Falrus and Earth. Falrus should be a quick and easy takeover. It's nearer to us, and it's effectively only one country. Earth will tackle when we have the technology. Being so far away, it would be foolish to take it on just yet. Now, sir, here comes the interesting part. We need to get information about the level of intelligence on Falrus. Our alert cameras planted in most areas of Falrus have informed us that the general thinking right now in Falrus, ever since Professor Bradakas made his discovery, which pointed to the possibility of life beyond Landesimag, is that we, in the so-called old world, are life forms threatening to steal their solar energy. If only they knew what they were in for.
We plan to kidnap as many people from their planet as possible. If only the chambers in our most advanced interplanetary nucleomagnetic transportrons could carry adults, we would have no problems at all. We could simply snap up their leading scientists and force them to talk. Unfortunately, gravitational requirements restrict the maximum load in our transportrons. But we didn't give up, no sir. As a result of this setback, I devised a new plan to get their children. However, there was a flaw in my new plan as well, as my good friend Commander Rukas pointed out to me. If we switched children rather than snatched, it would be a while before they realized what was going on. We have done our best to match selected children in Falrus with those of our subjects here in the districts. But we expect suspicion to arise at some point. But then, of course, we would have obtained the information we needed from the kids, and we may or may not send them back to their solar system depending on your mood, sir. Of course, it would not matter, because by then, Falrus would be under our control anyway. Commander Bonzok was in his element. I like your fairy story, Bonzok, the president said with a glint in his eye. I only hope you can turn it into reality. Trust me, sir, it will work. After all, our ancestors took over the districts without any problems, despite being refugees from a burnt-out half-galaxy. Falrus would be no contest at all. I'll make you a promise, Bonzok, the president said. If you conquer Falrus, I'll make you its ruler. Thank you, sir, Commander Bonzok replied, standing at attention. I will not disappoint you. It would be your first and last time if you do, the president said, and pressing a button under his desk, was whisked out of the room, still seated. Chapter 4. A week had gone by since I last saw Square. On Monday morning, I was in trouble again. I was having trouble waking up. Dad left for work early and everyone else followed suit, except for me, that is. Mom was livid. Kieran, get yourself into the bath before I really get angry, she shouted from downstairs, as Dulis, Gomi and Pago had breakfast like the dutiful, obedient sons they were. Here we go, another Monday, I thought dolefully. It was such rotten luck for me to have a few more of those before my exciting adventure with Square. I dragged myself to the bathroom and threw water over myself. I was ready and down the stairs in no time at all. But it seemed it wasn't to be my day, for the first thing Mama asked was, "Have you said your prayers, darling?" How did she know? I felt it would be utterly unforgivable to lie, so up I went to kneel by my bed. When I returned 2 minutes later, I was rebuked only twice more, once for stretching for the milk, and once for talking with my mouth full. Mom packed me an apple with my snacks. Maybe she thought fruits might sort out my behavior or something, and gave me a kiss on my forehead as she dispatched us off. Turns out it wasn't to be Dulis or Gomi's day either. For the record, somehow what began as a faultless Monday morning for them degenerated into a Giran-like day. I even felt something approaching empathy for Gomi. You should be used to me by now, Demba. He slapped me on the back and I almost fell over. Watch how you handle my brother, Gomi said, expressing sense of humor failure. Experiencing sense of humor failure. Take it easy, Gomi, Square said. I called you over because I had something to show you. I wish you'd loosen up a bit and put at least a pretend smile on your face. What's up, Square? Johnny Ducey was suddenly standing next to us with his hands in his pockets. He looked like he'd just been in a fight. Another one. Get lost, Johnny, Square said, shoving him aside. This is wow stuff. Come on, Square. I'll do anything if you let me join wow. Johnny looked desperate. I felt sorry for the guy. Johnny had no friends. He was therefore an obvious choice for any would-be bully looking for easy prey. I often wondered about his name. Once I asked Dad what kind of name it was. Dad said it sounded like a name originating from Earth. I asked Dad how he knew. He said Jesus lived on Earth, apparently. Apparently, Johnny was a version of the name John, as in John the Baptist. But then how come a Falrusian boy had that name? I wondered. Strange. Maybe Johnny was some sort of alien. No wonder the poor kid had no friends. Johnny was an admirer of our gang, Warriors of the Old World, WOW, wow. He had been asking if he could join for ages now. It was his passport to being accepted, and we knew it. But we weren't too sure if this was a risk we should take. Our credibility was all too important. Today, however, I was feeling a little generous. I decided to end Johnny's misery. You can join us, Johnny, I said, to the astonishment of my brother and friend. No, he can't, Gomi said through clenched teeth. He's an outsider. Let's give him a chance. I stood firm. Please, Johnny pleaded. All right, Square said. You can join us on one condition. Yeah, what's that? Johnny asked. He looked ready to do just about anything we asked. You would have to do our homework for the rest of the term. Deal. That was easy. Johnny was smiling. He was a clever boy and had something of the nerd about him. To him, this condition was a cheap one. We were happy too. All three of us were weak in spelling and my math wasn't up to scratch either. The rest of the term was going to be better than I expected, I thought with glee. So, what have you got to show us? Johnny asked, pushing his luck. Just then, the bell for assembly went. Great, we said in unison, and made our way to the playground where others were beginning to gather. At playtime, Square whispered, for our head teacher and some of the other teachers were already hovering, and it just wouldn't do to be caught talking at assembly on a Monday morning. It had a way of ruining the rest of your week, and I should know. I'd been there on a number of occasions. It was in our best interests to keep Mondays trouble-free, especially this close to the summer vacation. After prayers, we stood at attention to sing our national anthem, which was more commonly known as our national prayer. I was proud of my country, so I puffed out my chest as far as it would go as I sang, Kingdom of Falrus, we salute you, land of our fathers, planet of warriors, to God our supreme deity, head of our universe, long may you reign. In our hearts and minds, we stand before you and beseech you, our king and kith and kin, to bless and sanctify. I breezed through half the morning, knowing that Johnny would do my homework for the week. I could not wait for the bell to ring at playtime. All I could think of was what surprise Square had in store for us. Unfortunately for me,
Our geography teacher, Miss Hepworth, spotted my relapse into dreamland. Kiran Demba, would you care to share your private thoughts with the rest of us? The woman was 6 feet 2 inches tall. I had always felt it was unethical to have her teach in a grade school, but right now I felt it was a crime. One day when I was all grown up and I had my knighthood, I was going to campaign for her immediate dismissal. The king would oblige, I was sure. I suddenly remembered. The woman had the same surname as King Haibok. Any relation, I wondered, with resignation. Oh, why did things never go the way I wanted them to? I was right at the back. All my classmates were staring at me. This was one of the few occasions in Miss Hepworth's class when everyone but the scapegoat had a great time. People actually prayed for times like this. Not with them in the starring role, obviously. I was praying too, but for an entirely different reason. I'm sorry, Miss Hepworth. I had my hands clasped behind me and I was looking like I always did in the little confessional box down at St. Barley's Church. Well, if you can't tell us what you were daydreaming about, I guess it must be something you really must want to keep to yourself. She was smiling benevolently at me. I was beginning to feel safe again. But I had been here before. Something told me not to relax just quite yet. That something was right. Miss Hepworth wasn't finished with me yet. You can dream on in private, here in the classroom at playtime while your friends are out playing. Sit down. I hated her. The whole class was laughing as I sat down heavily, knowing that I would have to wait until lunchtime before hearing about Square's surprise. As if reading my thoughts, Square whispered in my ear, I'll tell Wow about the surprise at lunchtime. You are not going to miss out. I could have hugged him, but I couldn't move. Miss Hepworth's eyes were on me, burning a hole in my face. I gave my work full attention for the rest of the morning. We had music, math, and history with Miss Hepworth, and then a whole hour of physical education with Mr. Buana. At lunchtime, I was the first out. I was joined later by Square, Gomi, and Johnny, and we strayed towards the dining room. So, Square, what is it? Gomi could hardly hide his ardor. Follow me, was all Square said, and we did. He took us to the crafts and technology room on the 4th floor. The elevators were full of hungry 5th and 6th graders coming down for lunch, so we had to run up the stairs instead, and at the top we were breathless. Square knocked on the door. Mr. Runecker opened it. Well, he said when he saw us, how nice to receive a visit during lunch. I can't get your friends to come in during lessons. What can I do for you? I brought a robot in today, sir, Square said. Mrs. Diranka took it in and said I could come back for it later. So that was Square's surprise, I thought excitedly, the robot. Okay, let's see. Now, where would she have put it? In there, sir. Square pointed to a big cupboard next to the storeroom. Mr. Runecker opened it, and standing there was the finest robot I had ever seen. Its color was a shiny metallic gray with blue stripes. It was about Dulys's height, about 5'9", and its only item of clothing was a cap which said Professor Potty. Kefra and I only finished building Professor Potty's brain last night, Square said. We even missed mass so we could finish it in time for today. You made it yourselves? Mr. Runecker asked, incredulous. It sure is remarkable, Tawam. I knew you were clever, but this is absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I exclaimed, you're the best, Square. Wow, said Johnny, astounded. So, Are we going to see the professor move? Mr. Runecker moved the robot out of the cupboard. Square took out something that looked like a nuclear TV remote control from his pocket. This is the programmer, he explained. Every action or word of Professor Potty's has already been programmed in. All I have to do is turn the switch on or off, or delete the whole program by pressing reverse, in which case he is utterly useless, and a new program would have to be built into the programmer. My sister has another one of these programmers. We decided to make 2 copies just in case one of us lost hers or his. Professor Potty has been programmed to be an advanced high-performance prototype. He can do almost anything a human can do and much more. And his energy source is almost permanent, guaranteed for 100 years. His is the most sophisticated program ever put together, and I formulated it myself. I also constructed my own manual. And as for his intelligence quota, boy, you don't want to know. He can do any sum, decipher any code, and simply knows everything. I'll show you what I mean. Square pressed a little red knob that had on printed on it. Professor Potty seemed to come alive in seconds. He gave us a little bow, making us all laugh, and said in a man's voice, "Number." "Good afternoon. My name is Professor Potty, and my code number is XL444358. Please find my programmer in case of an accident. Thank you for your cooperation." "What's he saying?" I asked, puzzled. Square smirked. "I've got to delete all of that stuff. I forgot to tell you, the programmer is one of the ways to bring back Professor Potty to life. Its code number is the same as its restart code, so anyone can use it to restart him in case of an accident, i.e., if someone accidentally switches him off, or his leads disconnect or blow up. There is another way to revive Professor Potty, but it's secret. Only Kefra and I know it." "What happens if someone deletes the whole program? You would have to start all over again?" Gomi noted. "Oh, and another thing," Square pointed to the reverse key. "This key contains built-in safety mechanism. Kefra and I are the only ones who can use it. The monitor recognizes the pattern on our fingertips and only obeys our request for reverse and no one else's. That way, only we can remove the program and Professor Potty is protected. The on and off buttons can be pressed by anyone because these operations are reversible." "Wow, Square, you sure have a hot brain," Gomin stated in deep respect. "Now, let's get Professor Potty to do some brain work," Square said, smiling from ear to ear. "Professor, what is the square root of 258.97? 16.09254. Professor Potty replied immediately. "Would you like the answer to be given to more decimal places?" he inquired politely. "No, that will do," Square said as we gaped in wonder. "Now for geography. What is the capital of Amparia?" "Lockfelly," the robot replied. "Give me the second largest city in Falrus." "Dionysi, second in population to the capital city of Koponti, Eldexpond." "Excellent," Johnny exclaimed. "This is out of this world." "Yeah," Gomi said. "Incredible." "He's the best," I added. "Can we take him to lunch?" Johnny asked. "You will do no such thing, Johnny," Mr. Runecker said, and mimicked Johnny's long face. "You will leave Professor Potty here while you have your lunch. And that, young man, is my final word." We filed out of the crafts and technology room, planning things for the robot to do. I could foresee many an afternoon of fun. People in the 7th district were used to the waiting sirens. People in the 7th district were used to the wailing sirens announcing the arrival of the armored vehicles. It was a familiar part of their lives, but recently the sound of the sirens meant much more than just police harassment. It meant anguish for a family whose child was going to be taken away. Terror lived in the hearts of these people whose lives had been wrecked by their so-called president and his troop of wicked and unscrupulous bullies. As usual, all the children of each family were hidden in a secret location within the house where the police would not find them. Some were hidden underneath a pile of dirty clothes in the laundry basket, others in the loft, others in holes made in the floor, others in potato sacks in the pantry. Jajan Kotak was behind the piano. His parents were at the window, watching in fear as the police approached their street. Ever since the Britha girl had been dragged kicking and screaming out of her home 2 houses away, they had feared for their only child, Jajan. They had considered sending him to the 3rd district where his uncle lived, but had to drop that idea when his uncle wrote them a letter asking if his daughter could come and stay with them because a boy from their neighborhood in the 3rd district had been taken away from his family. No one had seen or heard from that boy since. They had stopped sending Jajan to school, for some children who went to school never returned. Jajan never left their sight. While his father went to work, Jajan stayed at home with his mother, who had to quit work to look after him. This warm July evening, the air smelled thickly of imminent danger. The Kotaks' fear turned to horror as they realized that the police were coming to their home, not next door or past their house, straight to their door. The moment they had been dreading was fast approaching, and there was nothing they could do to stop it happening. Mrs. Kotak started praying. Mr. Kotak checked again that the locks on the front door were secure. The armed men were now standing in their front yard. One of them knocked on the door. The Kotaks froze. Mrs. Kotak was sobbing quietly. The policeman knocked again. Another made his way to the back of the house. The whole street was eerily quiet. The other families were praying for their unfortunate neighbors. Those with children knew their turn would surely come. "Open the door, Mr. Kotak. We know you are in there," one of the policemen with the loudspeaker said. "Come out of your house with your hands in the air and bring your boy along. Remember, if you cooperate with us, you and your family will be unhurt. However, if you want to end up in hospital, all you have to do is misbehave. If you do, you put your boy's life in jeopardy and your future at risk. It's your choice, Mr. Kotak. You've got 10 seconds to make up your mind, starting now." Mrs. Kotak was hysterical now. "Do something, Vaki," she cried. "I'm going to do as they say," he whispered to her. "That way, Jajan has a chance of survival. If we resist, they might kill him." "No, no," Mrs. Kotak screamed. "Don't let them take away my baby, please." It was to no avail. The door was broken down by the policemen who demanded to know where Jajan was. Without waiting for an answer, they began searching the house. It was a matter of seconds before Jajan was dragged out from behind the piano. The boy was bundled off into the police car before his parents could even recover from their shock. The police car carrying Jajan was back in the presidential headquarters in the 1st district in no time at all. Commander Bonzok was waiting. Jajan was carried inside the building. He was kicking and screaming, but the policemen took no notice. One of the men was comparing Jajan to a boy's photograph. "Give me the facts," Commander Bonzok said, his overstarched uniform bursting at the seams. "He's perfect, sir," the man said. "The only problem is that Farhan Moras has a small mole behind his left ear." But don't worry, sir, we'll fix that. After the training period, this little prince will look the part. Are you sure? Commander Bonzog asked, concerned. The president doesn't like mistakes, remember that. None of our exchanges has failed yet, and I'd like it to stay that way, understand? The commander was sweating and his tolerance level was plummeting fast. The man with the photograph realized that. He stood at attention and said in the most humble form he could find his voice in, almost whispering, "Give the boy a week, sir, and after that he will be Faran Moras, not just look, act and talk like him. Not even his mother would be able to detect the difference." Good, Commander Bonzog was easily humored. He folded his arms in front of his chest and positioned himself in front of Jajan. The frightened boy looked down at his feet. Commander Bonzog regarded him with inquisitive eyes for a few minutes. Finally, he raised the boy's chin with his hand and said quietly to him, "You do as you are told, boy." The boy managed a barely audible, "Yes, sir," as Commander Bonzog turned on his heels and left the room without another word. The rest of the day at school was, for me, like sitting in church thinking about the turkey on Christmas Day. After leaving the crafts and technology room, we had talked about nothing else but Professor Potty. Square had suggested that we take him with us to see a PG film. After all, his very voice was that of Square's father, according to Square. He said he had programmed his father's voice into the programmer, which was Professor Potty's brain. To all intents and purposes, Professor Potty was Square's father, so he could take us to a movie, surely. Johnny suggested that we take Professor Potty to the circus and charge people for a look at him. We planned to take him out to the park that afternoon. It was extremely painful for me to sit through the characteristics of insects during that afternoon's science lesson. But after my experience that morning, I didn't relish the idea of spending 10 minutes after school in private thought. I did my best at science and later religion with Miss Hepworth went like a dream for me, uneventful. I knew she hadn't forgotten me and was on the lookout for me. So it was all work and no play for little Giran Demba. When the final bell rang, I was so happy I forgot to leave the classroom. I was sat there thinking what a glorious day it was when Square startled me by springing me. "You don't live in St. Farans, Giran. What's the matter? Can't remember your home address?" "Oh, don't worry. Big Brother Square will take you home." We laughed as I gathered my books and tidied up my desk. Gomi met us in front of his classroom, 4C. Johnny, who was in Gomi's class, had already gone home. We walked to the car park together. There were lots of children and parents about. Dulis was nowhere to be seen. "Aren't you taking Professor Potty home?" Kieran asked Square, suddenly realizing the object of our plans for the afternoon was not with us. "Don't fret," Square said. "I have sent him to Zori's to hang out till we're ready for him. Then I'll call him over." Zori's was our local fast food restaurant. "But how can you do that?" I asked in surprise. "Surely he can't hear you from all that way." I didn't see him carry a nuclear phone. "He wears a personal radio. I can speak to him via that, through the programmer," Square replied matter-of-factly. Wow. Gomi was impressed, so was I. "Hey, Square, have you read up our top priority matter?" I winked at him for Gomi's benefit. "Oh yeah, I did. You want to hear it?" Square replied, understanding my sudden secrecy. Gomi eyed us suspiciously. "What's going on? Why the winks? I am part of WOW, aren't I?"
This is not wow business, Gomi. This is something purely for Square and me. You didn't come to our little meeting last week, so you're not a part of it. Oh, come on, Kieran. I found that object, remember? I have just as much rights in this as you do. You can't push me out. Yeah, we can, Gomi. You didn't want to join us. You wanted to go surfing, remember? All right, you go surfing when we go to Pasquando. Square and I will get started on our adventure without you. Tit for tat, I thought. Gomi tried to appeal to Square's good nature. He knew I would not give in. He was right. I mean, right, Square? Square looked at me, unsure how to proceed between twin brothers. No, Square, I said emphatically, but Square was caving in. Come on, Kieran, he's your brother. You let Johnny join WOW, and he's virtually an alien. Come on, loosen up. They had me. There was nothing else for it. All right, Gomi, you're in. On one condition. Gomi pulled a face. Go on, I'm listening. You pay me 2 kangris out of your pocket money. Gomi sighed unhappily. You saw Doolis fleece me out of 10 kangris this morning, Kieran, he cried. Are you going to look me in the face and do the same to me? For goodness sake, Kieran, we're twins. Doesn't that count for anything? He looked at Square for sympathy, but the astute genius looked away. The matter was out of his hands now. He'd done his best for Gomi, and now it was up to me to make the final decision. No, it doesn't, I said coolly. Gomi scowled at me. All right, Kieran, have it your own way. I'm not interested in your stupid adventure anyway. I smiled victoriously at him. He scowled back at me, and sticking his tongue out at me, he stalked off. I sighed, and Square shrugged his shoulders. All right, let's talk business, I said when Gomi had gone. What did you find out about our interesting object? Square walked off to a tree and sat down underneath it. I joined him, curious about what he was going to say. I read about it in my super encyclopedia, he said, with a frown of deep concentration spread across his forehead. Remember I told you that the high energy source powering that object, let's call it a HEST, HEST, High Energy Source Telescope, was ultra nuclear magnetic radiation? Well, I was right. It's a special type of nuclear magnetic radiation. It's the highest energy source available in both galaxies of the universe. This is powerful stuff I'm telling you about. This energy source is only replaceable by the sun's solar energy, concentrated to about 80 times its power value. I stared at Square, open-mouthed. It took me a while to regain my composure. You mean it could blow up the planet or something? No, Kieran, that's not the aim. For some reason, the inhabitants of the old world want to spy on us. As I said, this is a telescope, not a bomb. The energy source is very powerful, though, because in order to spy on us, the object had to cross line decimark. And line decimark is a barrier to all matter. I was confounded. Square was blowing my mind with science. Why didn't he just apply for a job in my father's lab? If I had his brains, I would. At least, it would be a sure way of getting out of school and out of Miss Hepworth's grasp. How do we get it out of the local hills? I asked, for want of something better to ask. I was coming to that, Square replied, annoyed at my impatience. I found out by accident that this energy source would benefit Professor Potty very much indeed. I have equipped him with ordinary short-range nuclear magnetic radiation, but that is finite. This would be a perfect recharger for him. So, to get this thing out of loco, we have to go there and get it, using the mirror as our shield, As I said, the mirror can reflect the energy source, so we won't be in danger if we keep the mirror between it and us the whole time. But how are we going to get to the local hills? I asked. We'll never be allowed to go there by ourselves. You'll have to persuade your parents to take you there sometime, Square said. That's not going to be easy, Square, I protested. What about you? Why can't you go? My family never go to the local hills. My parents would get suspicious if I suddenly wanted to go there. You go there practically every month. Say you forgot something the last time you went there. Make up an excuse. All right, Square, you win. We'll find a way of going to local. If you'll come with me, I said at last. Sure, I'll come, don't worry. This is going to be super. Professor Potty will be even stronger than before, and he can help us with this mystery. Yeah, excellent, I said. When Doolis arrived, I parted with Square. Meet me at 5 tonight, okay? Square shouted as I waved to him once Spargo and Gomi had got into the car with us. All right, I shouted back. See you then. Supper that night was a quiet affair. Gomi and I were determined not to offend. He had his appearance before that still to come. We made up. Even Pargo was more quiet than usual. Only Doolis carried on as normal. But then he was 17. He could do as he pleased. Life was so unfair, I thought, for the umpteenth time that day. Straight after supper, Gomi and I left for Square's house on the next street, Prolino Street. Mum was surprised at our good behavior and decorum over supper and told us so. To reward us, she gave us permission to go out on condition that we returned in an hour. It was impolite to hang out too late at Square's, she said. Besides, we had homework to do. But Gomi and I knew otherwise. Prolino is the Falrusian word for arch. Prolino Street was so curved that it took us more time than we would have liked to get to Square's despite taking a shortcut through our back garden. Gomi rang the doorbell as we stood before the bright blue door. Square's mother appeared before us. She seemed to have been expecting us. The door was opened barely seconds after Gomi rang the bell. Hello, boys, she said in her welcoming way. I liked her. I wondered if she was looking for a career in grade school teaching. I had just a job for her. Hello, Auntie Wayna, we said politely as she took us into her beautiful house. Tawam will be down in a minute, she said to us. Square came tearing down the stairs, showing no regard for the life of the cat taking a nap on the top step. He and Professor Potty's programmer. He had Professor Potty's programmer in his hand. We left for Johnny's soon afterwards. Johnny was thrilled to see us. This was a first for him, friends from school popping round to his home. His parents were certainly surprised when we turned up. His father was in the middle of demanding to see our ID when Johnny came to rescue us. Have you called for Professor Potty yet? Gomi asked, as soon as we had left Johnny's home. Not yet, but I can do it now, Square said. We all gathered round him as he spoke into the programmer. Square to Professor Potty. Come in, please. There was a few moments' delay before the deep voice replied. This is Professor Potty to Square. Do you know Brusty Park, Professor? The one in Rainky Road, a quarter of a mile from Zori's place? He asked. We shrugged our shoulders. None of us knew. I think it might be, Prof, Square said. It's not far from Zori's in any case. So you think you can find it then? Yes, Square. So how long will it take you then? Give me 20 minutes if you don't mind. Zori has me on washing up duties. Zori let you wash up? Square asked in surprise. Yes, he's a very good friend of mine now. He says he'll hire me if my owner doesn't mind. I work faster than any of his employees. Good work, Prof, Square said. See you in 20 minutes. After turning off the programmer, Square suddenly said, "Of course, why didn't I think of that before? He could work for Zori and earn money for us." That wouldn't be fair on Professor Potty, I pointed out. He's our friend. We shouldn't treat him as a servant. Besides, Zori is our friend too. Let Professor Potty work for him by all means, but only for his own enjoyment. He seems to like Zori. "Yeah, I agree with you, Giran," Gumi said. "Me too," Johnny added. "All right, if you say so," Square said. "Wow policy, right?" "Yeah," we said. We walked to the park and whiled away the time chasing squirrels. Professor Potty arrived in exactly 20 minutes. An old man walking his dog nearly fell over the poor animal when he saw our robot friend come roller skating towards us. "Here I am, Square," he said when he caught up with us. "What are your commands for me?" "No commands, Prof. You are here to play with us," Gumi said. "Play?" The robot's voice indicated surprise. "Yes, play, Professor," I said. "You can play ball with us and chase the squirrels. You can run, can't you?" "Sure he can run," Square declared proudly. "Show him how fast you can run, Professor." The robot straightened up and with a curt, "Here goes," he zoomed around the park with such speed I was dizzy watching him. His wheels made the sound of screeching tires as he turned the corner. Concerned that he would be arrested for disturbing the peace, we ran after him. He was sitting on a low wall at the end of Reinke Road when we caught up with him. "You were great, Professor," I said in between gasps for breath. "Do you want me to do it again?" he asked in his deep, monotonous voice. No," we all said in a hurry. We had had enough. The four of us were wheezing and panting so much we were beginning to sound like the woodwind section of an orchestra. "Why don't we play at something less strenuous, like, say, goodies and baddies?" Square suggested. "Excellent, dude." "Excellent, dude," Professor Potty said, much to our astonishment. "Where did you learn that word, Professor?" Square's eyes were as wide as saucers. "That word wasn't programmed into your vocabulary." "One of Zori's customers said it when he was introduced to me," said Professor Potty. "Do you realize what this means, guys?" Square exclaimed to us, all excited. "What?" we asked. "I have built a robot that has the ability to learn," he exclaimed. "Not only can he be taught to do stuff, he can also advance his intelligence. That means he is even more sophisticated than I first thought. Professor Potty can think for himself." I didn't know what sophisticated meant, let alone spell it, but I figured it was something good because Square was dancing in celebration. Johnny, Gumi, and I joined in, although we had no idea why. Even Professor raised a leg once or twice for good measure. We had fun for the rest of the afternoon, playing goodies and baddies. Gumi and Professor Potty were goodies, and the rest of us were baddies. Needless to say, the goodies won each time. At 10 to 7, I remembered that we had to be home by 5 to the hour. Gumi suggested we come back tomorrow, but Square remembered we had sports trials tomorrow evening at school. Frightened of the prospect of being late home, Gumi and I made a dash off as fast as we could, but Square stopped us. "Hey, did you remember to ask your parents about going to Loco?" he asked. I suddenly remembered. I had been so busy trying to stay out of trouble earlier on in the evening, I had forgotten to ask Mum. "I'll do that tonight." "Fine," Square answered. "Bye." He began to walk away hand in hand with Professor Potty. "Bye, Square," we said. Square turned back. "Hey," he said, "Professor Potty could take you. You'll be home in no time." What was usually a 10-minute journey for us took just 2. Professor Potty tucked us under his arms, and we were home before we knew it.